So I'm looking for Rubyology. Come on.
Oh, sweet. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, it should be on iTunes and it should be rubyology.com if you just want to look at the site.
Well, I want to subscribe to it.
Okay. Should be on iTunes.
It's a bandwidth issue, I think.
Are you on the Starbucks one or this one?
I'm on my own.
There's I think the Starbucks one's free, and then this one's called Next Space SC.
So our hotel was $14.95 per hour.
The good news is they bounce.
Not like per day.
Been trying to break this phone for a while now, so you get it.
Is that all San Francisco like that? Or just
I don't live staying in hotels around here.
No, yeah.
where do you?
I live in Overhead.
The red ones actually are all from this conference
I
room.
used to live in Soma. I worked on Market Street. Just
Okay.
4 blocks away from here.
Pivotal to the
Yeah.
medical office.
Yeah, between 3rd and 4th on Market.
Actually, the black ones
And I live, if you take the end, like 5 stops out,
Right.
it takes you to Upper 8th.
So no really.
Yeah.
And the other one's
It's kind of like on New Park.
Oh yeah. Cool.
There's back.
Alright. Boy, they've really changed this. I haven't used it. Hey, the Twit guys show up. How come you don't show up?
They're underwriting all
On
that to
iTunes?
actually allow for an unlimited amount of transactions to go through.
I think it's time.
Because they want
How's it going, Ben?
They are.
How are you?
Chris, man.
How's your trip?
It's 5 hours, and it's tolerable. Yeah. There's Wi-Fi, so
Oh,
we made it.
really?
No way.
Yeah.
So lucky. Is there power on the seat?
My sister lives on there. But this is the newer battery, so I got you get about 6.5 hours.
Really?
Battery, yeah. When I got it, it was 7.5, but it's kind of slow down.
On a 10-hour trip, I plugged in a Mac, and like 15 minutes later, I blew up the seat, basically for power. So I called the cabinet, had to reset the software for my seat, and it didn't come up.
Damn.
Oh, I was so pissed.
Oh, is still back there?
Was it a long flight?
Still done anything?
10-hour flight. And then he's like, the air stewardess came in, she's like, can you take out your battery that the captain said?
All right, guys. I think we're gonna go ahead and get started.
Can't just take out the battery.
Right, yeah. Well, that was the thing, is the seats can't actually charge the machine. They can only hold it. They don't have enough current. So.
Exactly. And Mac requires more power than some PCs.
Okay, we're going to commence with commencing.
Commence with commencing.
Let me
So maybe.
Stand by to stand by.
Shall I start?
not yet, because if you're gonna talk first,
Yeah, I'm gonna give a little intro.
I'm gonna get him on the video and then I'll switch to you.
So welcome. My name's John Higgins. I'm the evangelist at Foxeo Labs, and you can find me on Twitter, Johnny Diggs. I go by both names, so you may see people call me Diggs or John or Johnny. I answer to all of them. So Diggs is actually my stage name.
With a Z.
With a Z, Diggs with a Z. So anyway, this is the first conference since I've been back at Voxeo. I was one of the co-founders of Voxeo about 10 years ago, and back then my job was to head up our developer community, and we were doing things with PHP developers. Ruby didn't really exist back then. We did things with Cold Fusion, so we did a lot of these kinds. And I left Voxeo for a while and came back a couple months ago. And so this is the first effort in a new push to do more things like this at Voxeo Labs. So hopefully this seems so far to be working out pretty well. So I guess we'll do more. So I just wanted to go over a couple things. This is Next Space. This is a shared co-working space. There are people who are not part of our conference that will be coming in and out of here. These offices here and in the corners are actually like dedicated offices to people who are renting them. So just kind of be courteous and and be respectful of other people who might not care about adhesion. Can't figure that out. So one thing we were talking about, a few of us were having dinner last night, and we thought we'd try something that that Ben suggested as sort of a protocol that we may try today, and then maybe we'll try it again tomorrow. Get everybody just real quick, introduce yourself, say where you're from, maybe what company, and that's it. Tomorrow maybe we'll do it again, reinforce everybody's name, and we'll pick something else to describe about yourself other than where you're from and what company you're with. So why don't we start with Jay?
I'm Jay Phillips. I think most of you guys know I'm the creator of Adhearsion, and I look forward to meeting all of you and memorizing your names and getting to know what you're doing with Adhearsion. It's all really interesting to me. It's also awesome to get to see so many awesome things coming out of the community, and hopefully this talk will help bolster that energy a little bit more.
You're gonna have a whole thing to talk about all yourself. Name, where you're from, company.
Jason Gecki, San Carlos, Bay Area, right here, and with Foxeo Labs.
Adam Kelsey, also with Foxeo Labs, and I've completely forgotten where I'm from. I'm traveling too much.
Jiao Lu, I'm from China. I work for Orange Labs. It's like that logo, but it says orange.
Ben?
I'm Ben Klang. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. Work for a company called Verendus.
Jim Freeze from Austin, Texas. Got my own company, and I'm also with Lone Star Recon.
Great.
Jim Ozer, and I'm from Nevada, which is just north of Sausalito. I've been going to a lot of the local Ruby meetups, and I heard about this meeting and it sounded interesting.
Great. Jose, you want to go?
Yeah, Jose de Castro. I'm with Voxeo Labs, chief architect there, and based out of Orlando, Florida.
Michelle Valancourt from Montreal currently, and JKL5.
Robert Allen, Chicago, if by phone.
Eric Lindvall, Seattle, if by phone, Cloudbox.
Alright, we'll play volleyball.
I'm Chris Matthew, Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm the Director of Business Development for Voxeo, formerly the founder of Teleco.
Recently joined the Voxeo Labs team.
A round of congrats for Chris.
Yes.
Troy Davis, Seattle, when I'm there, and Cloudbox, which is a unit of InfyPhone.
All right, great. So that's fantastic. One of the things that I'd like to see happen here is, and from talking to you guys, that the Adhearsion group, while has some core, some gravity, doesn't seem to be as much of a community as it could be, and so hopefully this will help kick that off a little bit better. And so with no further ado, I'm going to introduce Jay Phillips, who created Adhearsion, and he's going to talk about something. I don't even know what you're talking about, but here he is, Jay.
Cool. Wait for the AV. Tell me when to go.
Yeah, are you going to talk first, or are you going to go jump? All right.
Yep, straight to the slides.
You're in.
Cool.
Just keep them in camera.
Yeah.
Hopefully I can do the iPhone app remote and also present at the same time. So, howdy everyone. It's awesome to be here. It's kind of hard to believe where I am. AdhearsionConf. As I was mentioning earlier, it's like I turn my head and then suddenly, bam, AdhearsionConf just pops up. And I think with a little bit of attention, the energy can keep rolling. And I think this talk, which is mostly sort of an organization of a lot of the ideas that I've come up with over the past couple of years, will help foster some ideas that you guys may want to use and help build up your own sort of careers or opportunities, or however you see yourself relating to Adhearsion. So there's a lot of people to thank. I put Ben and Jason up here because they're sort of the the core team, I have pretty much all of you guys to thank, especially Voxeo, who's been putting on this conference. And I don't think I need to say much more than just thanks a million times. Really appreciate it. And
looks like red hat.
yeah.
Is that a red hat?
It is a red hat. It's not a red hat, red hat.
So it's worth mentioning that I don't deserve any credit for this conference. I have pretty much Jason and the rest of the team to thank, and the Adhesion code base has been exploding since I left. These are the
Sorry, I'm gonna have to leave it off because when it's in full screen, it kills the video feed.
Really? Damn.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Cool. How do I advance the slides?
Just tell me.
Yeah, and if you could switch to this side of the thing so you're closer to the camera. No, just come in. Yeah, there you go.
2 feet forward.
There you go.
Now stand on one foot.
Can you dance? Can you juggle?
I can yo-yo, does that count?
Yeah, no, the mic and the camera over here. And
Yep. Cool. So yeah, these are the committers since I've last committed.
For a base hit, he doubled down the bike.
Thank you for enjoying the conference.
And I think Jason and Eric are the only ones that I've met sort of before today. So just a bunch of new names. It's still blowing my mind. This conference blows my mind. This slide blows my mind. And I love to see this community growing. I can't be any happier. So a couple conference things. Twitter hashtag. Looks like it's already been sort of publicized. Next slide. All right, this is something I'm pushing. Werewolf game tonight. Not on the agenda. Highly recommended. We've done this at tons of conferences, especially Ruby conferences. In case you haven't heard of it, Werewolf, which is also called Mafia, is a social game. Sit in a circle, and the whole game is just talking. I can go into the rules later tonight, but the reason why I suggest is because Werewolf, especially at conferences, is the best way to get to know people, because it brings out a side of them which is completely unprofessional. It's very personal, and having been to probably half a dozen conferences where we play this, you play Werewolf with someone, and then the next day you're like best friends with that person. And since we all come out of our way to this place, I think it's worth it. Can you go to the next slide? I think it's worth it to try to get to know each other. It's not just about like hacking on things and watching talks. It's also about letting the community sort of get stronger and more tight knit, because if we want to make Adhesion better, it's best to work together, and working together is best if we know each other. Next slide. Oh, by the way, here's a couple slides. RubyConf 07. This is Food Camp 08, and Jimmy, you can't see it, but there's like Jimmy Wales and Chris Sabona and like C. Frank at this thing. So, and the other side had Chad Fowler and Marcel Molina, who are also Adhesion committers too. But okay, next slide. Yeah. So, we're gonna have notes showing up.
Is there a way to turn those off?
You can just, you guys can answer the questions. This is like,
Okay.
Right. So, I usually like to ask questions whenever I give these talks. So, how many of you guys like have built Adhesion applications before?
Does Simon count?
Simon again? Cool. Committed to Adhesion? Awesome. And made money writing Adhesion apps. Yeah.
I do bagel toaster.
Exactly, indirectly. I'm wondering if I have any like incriminating notes that are gonna pop up.
I think I just figured out how to hide them if you want them gone.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome.
Let me see.
It's like the werewolf game, but interactively.
Yeah.
We're gonna learn more about it in this one way.
You're safe now.
All right.
Cool. Next. So, so what is it? I actually wanted part of the question was to see how much I need to go into detail about what Adhesion is. Does anyone sort of not really know what Adhesion is about? Should I? Okay, so I don't need to go into a lot of detail. Good. So, you can probably fly through these. This is just a great example I got from the Cloudbox website. Actually, it's playing like the latest tweet from Mars. It's pretty awesome. Next slide. Simple IVR. Next slide. Installing adhesion. Next slide. Configuring next. Just hit next. It's gonna. Oh, yeah, cool. It actually doesn't have animations. I was gonna animate, but all right. So this is my talk at improving adhesion. Next slide. There's a number of things I want to talk about. The first one is sort of the obvious one. It's one that everyone seems to be talking about these days. It's free switch support. Hopefully, we can get a hack session together at this meetup and start working on the free switch support. Adhesion 080 was originally free switch only, and this was back in like 07, like mid 07, a long time ago. And basically people didn't demand it. Free switch has matured. Asterisk is kind of like, I feel like it hasn't really developed any things which would improve the way adhesion works. If anything, it's kind of like become a little bit buggier in some ways. So free switch seems like a great telephony engine that's more philosophically aligned with adhesion, and hopefully we can get the ball rolling with free switch support. And I look forward to hacking with you guys. You know, at Pivotal, I do pair programming every day. I'd love to do pair programming with you guys. I think that would be awesome, and maybe we can mix it up, and some of you guys can pair together, and we can figure out what to work on. And it seems like it'd be really fun. Next slide. Rails 3 compatibility. Rails is about to change in a really big way. It shouldn't be too difficult to do this. In fact, there's a lot of changes in Rails 3 which will make adhesion integration a lot better. One thing is that you can have multiple applications in the same process. So Rails 3 apps are actually namespaced with a constant for your application. The neat thing about this is you can have components with their own web interface, and you can load multiple components with multiple web interfaces and have adhesion figure out how to route certain things. So it was sort of a problem before where if you have an adhesion app and that tries to require like a Rails environment that's bundled with it, you're gonna like clash with things. You know, if there's like 2 users or something, it's gonna be a problem. With Rails 3, they've kind of realized that things like adhesion might want to actually pull something in, pull multiple apps in, and fixes that big problem. And active model is awesome. I don't know if you guys have been following the Rails 3 space, but active model is the new underpinnings of active record. It's it exposes active record like APIs, but it isn't necessarily backed by SQL. Active record is an implementation of active model, which implements the active model APIs by going to SQL for persistence. So there's a lot of things in adhesion and in telephony in general which can be represented as objects. I think, especially as collections of objects, I think active model for traversing things like the current calls or channels or queues and agents and stuff like that. I think that would be a really awesome way of interacting with an API. Next slide. Gem-based components. I'm losing a little bit of the bottom. That's okay, I guess. This is something that's become possible pretty recently. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but the Ruby space is kind of switching to bundler in the way that they switched to Git. That is like in unison. Like whenever Git came out, it was they did like a Tron right turn in the direction of Git. It's happening again with bundler. Adhesion is something that's the perfect candidate for bundler, and the idea is that to install a component, instead of doing an enable component Simon game, you would do gem install Simon game. The new Ruby gem API allows gems to publish metadata. So you can query the current system's gems for anything which exposes like a component, an adhesion component. You can have that send like a bunch of YAML, so you can maybe like find information about it, like what kind of features it exposes as a component, to use a component in an adhesion application would be just like using a gem or using a plugin in Rails 3, where you have a gem file in your app. You say gem Simon game, and that finds it in the system gem repository and just requires it, and that's all it takes to enable a gem. Next slide. Event machine and fibers. So I think Ben has been working on this a little bit. Event machine is a way of doing evented networking in Ruby. Right now the AGI server is, it requires there be one thread per call, which is a little bit suboptimal, especially considering you can have fibers and event machine and have it scale much better. I actually haven't heard of any scaling problems with adhesion. In fact, the only thing I've heard has been good news, but I haven't heard of people running like 1,000 calls through it. Something like event machine with fibers would make it, would sort of obviate any like performance problems that we could see up to like 10 times what it was before. With fibers, you get to reuse a lot of CPU resources while the socket is blocking. So right now, the blocking I/O is basically, it's tying up threads, tying up system resources. Event machine is really optimized for this kind of stuff. The thread kind of just goes away, like while it's blocking, while you say play some long sound file, there's actually no system resources being used at all during that. It just tells it to go do something. The fiber gets sent off into RAM. Whenever the response comes back, event machine delegates it to something which resumes the fiber. And since adhesion dial plans are blocking probably like 99% of the time, it really does help performance quite a bit. So fibers were introduced in Ruby 1.9. There's some backports for Ruby 1.8. You could actually implement the same fiber API with threads. So in a worst case scenario, if you like had to use 1.8.6 for some reason, you could still get all the API benefits that this might introduce and have it be as sufficient as it was before. But with Ruby 1.9 or even JRuby, you could use fibers and see these benefits. So next slide. Super Manager. Hope you guys can read that. Platform independent AMI like API. So right now, the way you interact with AMI, Asterisk Manager Interface, is through a Manager Interface class. It's basically a bunch of functions. You execute the functions with parameters, you get back a result. It's pretty simple. Super Manager is something that I've been wanting to do for years, and it's about time that we start talking about it, especially now that we're talking about other platforms. With Super Manager, the idea is that everything appears as an object. So whenever you execute an action to the manager interface, you're doing it expecting objects back and expecting to give objects as parameters. And the awesome thing about that is we can start standardizing on sort of this object graph that represents a telephony engine, and implementing the various features for new telephony engines would be just trying to reproduce that object graph on different systems. So I think that's a big improvement over even something like the current manager interface class. Next slide. I think a lot of people don't realize that Adhesion actually has configuration generators. This is real code taken from, I think, the engine RPDX that when ran goes to the database, gets these groups. It's an active record model group, and defines a bunch of queues. So queue here is the way a queue is defined. It takes a block, and inside that you define members. So you say queue definition.member, etc. You get the idea, and as we start talking about free switch support, I think configuration generators will become awesome because you can start pulling more logic into Adhesion. Free switch actually supports a way to pull configuration files from HTTP. So Adhesion can start up an HTTP server, generate config files, send it to FreeSwitch, and the amount of configuration you have to do is trivial. I mean, it could even be like a rake task or something to like set up some FreeSwitch directory. All of the logic could reside in Adhesion, which is, I think, the ultimate goal, right? If we have this framework that's abstracting the whole telephony engine, why not have configuration in there too? And
That's cool.
If you go to the next slide, the routing DSL is something that I think has always been really exciting to me, but it depended on so many other things that it was hard to get it going. It depends on configuration generation. So the routing DSL is a way of defining peers. I use the term provider in the next slide, but essentially dial will just take a number, and you could of course give it an override to like explicitly say go somewhere, but based on a DSL that is routes.rb, say, you could apply like least cost routing rules or failover or load balancing or whitelists or blacklists, or get certain routing information from a component, say. And go to the next slide. So this is an example of providers or SIP peers in both Asterisk and FreeSwitch. The idea would be to pull these both into Adhesion, have them spit out these definitions, but also take the next step to implement some convergent API for just defining like this abstract SIP peer concept, which translates to either sip.conf or sophia.conf.xml. So next slide. So this is the sort of the meat, as it were, of the routing system. This is just an experimental syntax. In fact, I've had debates about the syntax and whether it should be like more horizontal or more vertical, where you use a lot of nested blocks, or whether you use these operators that are overridden. But yeah, you can probably pick up what's going on here. It's just like routes.rb in Rails, where it starts from the top and goes to the bottom. The first line is saying route a US number, which is a constant, to either Asterlink or Vonage. These are providers, which I showed on the previous page, and this is an example of load balancing. So whenever someone tries to dial a US number, pick one of these two, and by randomizing which one you pick, it load balances with no effort. The next line is an example of regular expression, just matching a number that's 2 to 4 digits long. And this is showing failover, where it'll try the home PBX and then try office PBX. You could have like say an array inside of here, and it would try multiple ones and pick the one which answered first. There's actually tests for this. I actually got these examples from Adhesion's main source code. There's a spec file that tests out this exact implementation, and it passes. Like it works. And I wasn't joking when I said like this has literally been like worked on for a long time. Like it's not that I've been doing this like at all from the past couple of years, but like circa like mid 07 or 08, like it was like a really interesting thing to me. But it really depended on configuration generation, which at the time didn't exist. So and the last example is using the asterisk pattern matching. I don't know if a lot of you guys even remember, but asterisk has its own pattern syntax. This is matching a US number as well, and going to a class which I use as an example of something which might come from a component, say. So, next slide.
Nice.
Alarms DSL. This is a pretty big issue. Phone systems are important, and they can suffer all kinds of problems. The routing DSL will hopefully solve a lot of those problems. But if you try to dial out over, say, like a PRI, the routing DSL can fail over and try something else. Maybe all 23 channels are taken, but it can send out an alarm saying like, hey, like this was there was a problem going to this. Maybe like the message queue died. Like if you're interacting with a lot of other things, you probably have a message queue. If that goes down, the component which interacts with that can sound an alarm. The alarms DSL can define how that makes it out to the people operationalizing the application. So it could send a text message through Foxeo or something, and you can maybe text message something back, and it goes back to the alarms DSL, and you execute some kind of recovery logic. Or it could send an email, or it could like play like the computer's piezo buzzer ad nauseum, or do whatever, right? And this is pretty simple to implement. It's actually a thin abstraction over events.rb. Right? This kind of exists already. You can kind of build the alarm DSL as a component. That is, it just subscribes to certain events. Events come in. There's a problem. Trigger the event. Goes to the alarms DSL where there's event handlers registered for it. So it's a pretty cool idea that I had a long time ago. My approach to building a lot of these features was to encounter them in some consulting project and then doing it. That's how the configuration generation eventually got built. Was I had to build a really sophisticated queues and agent system, and had to be backed by a database, and it was on Asterisk. Like shit. Okay, how do I build this? Configuration generation. That was better than the real-time configuration thing, which is not really reliable enough for the client. So alarms DSL, I'm interested to know whether you guys would find this interesting or find these other features interesting. We should talk about it and see which ones are the higher priorities. This is just a list of ideas that I've sort of like had in my head for years, and it's kind of worth talking about since I'm not engaged on a day-to-day basis with the Adhesion community anymore. Next slide. Okay, so this is a big point I want to make, and this is sort of the million-dollar question: is how does Adhesion infiltrate big, established companies? It's the problem with open source software versus big telcos and telephony solution providers is that it's kind of like Oracle versus MySQL. MySQL actually is now part of Oracle. I remember watching an interview with Larry Ellison, and he was saying Oracle and MySQL just don't compete whatsoever. And the way he was playing that argument was Oracle is for like these people way up here at the top of the world, and MySQL is for these little people down here. And I think that's the same way that open source and these expensive solutions are compared. There's like the like millionaire, billionaire people, and then there's like us down here, and I think there's actually a killer app for Adhesion that we haven't really talked about anymore, and that's testing. So I do Agile every day at Pivotal, and after thinking about this a little bit more, I think Adhesion could be a way for testing other applications. If you're writing your own Adhesion application, you could write an Adhesion application which tests your Adhesion application, and that would actually help bring Agile to the telephony industry. It's funny, whenever I started working on Adhesion, I was motivated by this desire to bring open source software to the telephony industry, and now I'm doing Agile, and it's like I want to bring Agile to the telephony industry, but you can't really do that without solid testing, right? It just doesn't make sense. You can't do Agile without testing. Next slide. Testing is the killer app. There's 3 different types of tests I want to talk about. I think a lot of people have probably thought about these, but I think there's a new approach that may be worth it. Maybe worth talking about. Next slide. Unit testing. The first one I'll talk about is I think what most people jump to whenever they think about testing a telephony system. That is, if I get to some point in my system, like say I'm working on a feature where, like in a conference, I hit like *22, takes me into some like IVR, press 1, and then that like sends off some like message in the message queue and like writes something to the database and then comes back. It's hard to even get to that point to define a unit to be tested, because the logic to get there depends on so much other stuff. That is, rarely are applications broken up in a very object-oriented way, and even if you did, it would kind of be a lot of indirection and wouldn't be like a really usable telephony system, right? It would get pretty complicated because telephony systems are like the quintessential procedural code. In fact, there's an argument for doing gotos because it's so procedural, right? I don't think you should do gotos, but it's you can easily think of how it's tempting to just jump to some other place instead of having to deal with all this other crap of like, okay, well I have to like maybe like raise an exception to get back up here, and then I have to like pass some information to the exception to get over here. So in fact that was one of the ways I had to build the menu system in Adhesion. The menu system actually uses exceptions to get back to like raise signals through multiple layers of things. So stuff like that is kind of it's kind of a mismatch between procedural code and trying to use object-oriented programming to implement the procedural code, right? And unfortunately, dial plans are a good use of procedural logic, and defining a unit around something inside of a bunch of procedural logic is difficult. But if you have models, say, in your app, those should definitely be unit tested. So when we talk about unit testing telephony applications, we can talk about unit testing the non-telephony parts of a telephony application, which actually may be most of the logic. But go to the next slide. Integration testing is sort of the main thing that I think Adhesion can help solve. So this is analogous to Selenium. If you think of Selenium for doing integration testing, Selenium actually starts up a web browser and like simulates clicking, and it's kind of crazy that it even works. In fact, it doesn't work like 5% of the time or 20% of the time, I find. But it shows the lengths to which you can and possibly should go to build an integration testing system. So here's sort of a really high-level overview of how this would work. The dependencies of a telephony application are Adhesion, all of the stuff inside of Adhesion, the telephony engine, any calls that might be going through the telephony engine, the database, the message queue, anything the message queue talks to, maybe the system. It gets pretty complicated, and fortunately, in the Ruby world, there are deployment and automation tools which allow you to like programmatically construct these things. And if you can define the universe as a network of finite state machines and understand that asterisk underneath Adhesion is basically a finite state machine where a call comes in, okay, it's in like a state where there's one active call, and then it transitions to a different state. And whenever you write a test, you want to assert that when there are 20 calls going through the system and someone else calls in, then they go to this queue instead of that queue, right? And if you want to write that integration test, you want a way of like reconstituting all this state. Also, telephony happens in real time. So this is another classic problem with testing telephony. It's not like a web browser where you can just click really fast and type really fast. It's like wait for the sound file to play, like interrupt it by pressing star after like 4 seconds. It's completely real time. So if you build the logic to build up this universe in a certain state, then you can run that in parallel using EC2. You spin up like 100 boxes that live for like 5 minutes and have them all like pound each other or something, and you could run maybe several hours worth of like actual real-time testing code in just a few minutes. And I think Adhesion offers, especially Adhesion with the testing community, which is awesome in the Ruby space. In fact, it's probably like the most advanced testing community there is, as well as like things like Puppet and Chef and Capistrano. These are all, and like Pool Party or what these other like EC2 gems. All of these things I think converge on something which allows Adhesion to build an awesome integration testing solution for telephony systems. Next slide. Acceptance testing. This is depending on the client, both an integration testing problem and a unit testing problem. It depends on what the client actually wants, what is being accepted. If you guys haven't heard of this, Cucumber is a way of doing acceptance tests where you write the test in basically English, and you write it usually in the Agile style in order to, as a I want, etc., given and blah, when, blah, then, blah. And if you, as a consultant, presented to your client scenarios which described in clear detail what was going on in the telephony system, which I think is completely feasible. Like, I can explain to my mom what happens during a phone call. You know, like I press 1, and then I go into a conference call, and I press star. Like, she understands those concepts. In fact, that's kind of like the nice thing about telephony. That's why people use this, because it's so understandable, right? If you can present that conversation in terms of an acceptance test, this just compounds the awesomeness that Adhesion could offer for integration testing. You can write Selenium integration tests in Cucumber. You know, you have, you know, given this URL, when I click this and like write this in here and then click this and then log out or something, you know, assert all these things happen. There's no reason why that's any different from telephony. So one last point about testing is, I think that is how we infiltrate the big telephony companies. You know, we offer this Adhesion thing. It's this nimble way of writing tests. Incidentally, you know, this is all marketing at this point. Incidentally, you can write applications with it, but the drug is to have them write tests using the rich testing ecosystem of Adhesion and the automation tools for spinning up 100 EC2 instances for 5 minutes and having them pound each other. And all of these things, I think, offer a solution which enterprises would value, and hopefully that can be the first door out for Adhesion, is actually doing testing. And you get tons of benefits from having all this testing stuff, right? You can test your Adhesion application. You can do, you know, your actual Adhesion application, not the one that you wrote to test it. And then that would be Agile telephony, I think. That testing is really the main barrier to doing full-on Agile. So, no, back beyond Asterisk with MobiSense. I talk about this because I'm really interested in this idea. A full stack telephony development framework. MobiSense has a media server, which is awesome. Does SipMethod have a media server?
Yeah.
Oh, SipMethod has a Java media server now?
It's not Java, but it's cross-platform.
Oh, is it open source? Okay, yeah. I would love to see this work on any platform which can, you know, maybe a proprietary platform too. The interesting thing is having Adhesion running inside of a Java process with a complete SIP API and a complete media server API. And I think that that's the most feasible way to build a really comprehensive testing solution. That is, if you control the media server and you control the SIP, you control all of the SIP. Because Adhesion really doesn't know much about SIP. If you think about it, like, it can talk the AGI commands to like instructable things, but it doesn't. But Asterisk doesn't provide a lot of stuff. FreeSwitch offers a lot more. But if Adhesion could get down at the SIP level, maybe write SIP-only applications in Adhesion, that would be awesome. To control media and to control media inside the Adhesion process is also like unbelievably powerful. And whenever these other things like Self-Inner or SipMethod are able to support this, it seems like it would be pretty simple, considering there's a standard for this, 289 and 309. I think the Java technologies are really exciting and overlooked in the open source telephony world. And through JRuby, you can run Adhesion inside of a Java process and get a lot of benefits from it. I haven't used MobiSense myself. I don't know whether it's terrible. You know, I've heard bad news about Sailfin. So MobiSense seems like the first place to go. Has SIP-method been open source?
Not yet.
Okay.
But we do have the Moho library, which is open source.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. It would be interesting to see whether the media server could be ported to SIP-method, the MobiSense media server, because that's really like the crucial part of this is controlling media at a mocking level. Like I want to mock out media altogether. You know, that would be awesome. Next, improving the adhesion community. All right, so this is sort of like the third segment of this talk, which is stuff that isn't internal to adhesion, it's sort of external to adhesion. Next slide. So this is something I think we could build at this conference, and it's really one of the main things that I think inhibits a lot of code sharing in the adhesion community, which is the ability or lack thereof to share components. Right now, if you write a component, you're going to put it up on GitHub and maybe send it on a mailing list and hope that someone hears about it. We should centralize this, and fortunately GitHub offers a really neat way of doing this. Essentially create a component, push it to GitHub, and use a feature on GitHub called the post receive hook, which is a way to specify a URL which, whenever you push to it, receives posts containing all the information about the commit. And it's not just like the message, it's like tons of information. It's really useful. So sitting somewhere else on the web at the destination of that post receive hook would be something which is taking in these commits from all these components on GitHub, aggregating that data and presenting like a directory of components. It would build a gem, and whenever you add a new plugin to your adhesion application, just like Rails 3, you would open up your gem file and say gem Simon Game source components.adhesion.com. It would be that simple. And the only difficult thing about this is taking a post receive hook, which gets data, you save it, you show it, you build a gem. And that's just a rig task, right, to build a gem. So it's really something that's within our grasp. We could even do it at this conference. I'll probably get started on this here. Hopefully one of you guys will want to pair and we can make it into like a little couple hour project. Should be able to get something going pretty quickly. This is a screenshot of GitHub, the post receive hook. It's in the admin section of the project. Click service hooks, post receive URLs, add this here. You can click test hook, which actually sends the latest commit to the system. So the user experience would be you create a component, push it to GitHub, and then add this here and click test hook. It would immediately show up in the directory without you having to like make a new commit and then push it for the post receive hook to go through. So it's kind of like perfect, right? I don't see any problem with this whatsoever. Next slide. And I encourage you guys to like make an adhesion website. There's the official adhesion website. I think some of you guys have blogs and you blog about this, but like Ruby on Rails has tons of sites, and those sites all have their own niche. And this component site could have like popped up out of the community. Sites are easy to make. Make a Sinatra app or Rails app, throw it on Heroku. It's like no, it's like free, right? It's just time. Next slide. Adhesion voicemail application. This is something that I would have loved to have seen, especially now that Twilio has their OpenVPX. They have like a Google Voice clone. This is something that Adhesion could do. I think it's kind of a killer app. I would love to have that at home. My own Adhesion server with like a voicemail manager and the ability to like call into it and then like type in a European number and then call out again to like not have to pay AT&T rates to call Europe. Stuff like that. There's a lot of these things which could be implemented even as components, right? Components plug into your PBX and or in a database or whatever. And it seems like this, it seems like actually someone's done this, or several people have done this already. It's just not open sourced. And it'd be great to see this come together. Troy, was it you who had like written something kind of like this voicemail application?
don't think we have a voicemail app, or at least not one that is more than, a couple lines of looker reports of
Okay.
file.
Cool. Well, I've talked to like a couple people about this. I can't remember who it was, but I know like these exist. Adhesion voicemail systems exist somewhere. Just need to find them and hopefully convince people to open source them. But it'd be great to have sort of a competitor to Google Voice, because that is kind of the killer app of telephony these days. For like the end user, it's like a Google Voice type system, right? Next slide. Jason and I have talked about this quite a bit, graphical dial plan builder. If anyone wants to learn HTML5, this is like the perfect like pet project to do it with. If you want to learn Cappuccino, which is a framework for building HTML5 applications, if you go to like 280slides.com, they have an example Cappuccino app, and it's like one of the slickest web apps you'll ever see. And it's a great way of building these kind of very graphical things and managing lots and lots of JavaScript. In fact, they actually abstract JavaScript. They have an Objective-J language which lets you build applications with basically Cocoa APIs. There's also Sprout Core. Sprout Core is from Apple, although no longer. The guy who wrote Sprout Core just left. Anyway, it's a pure JavaScript framework for building HTML5 applications. You actually write JavaScript, and I think this would be a great pet project for anyone wanting to like build something that would help get Adhesion into more hands. If this were a component, you could plug it into an Adhesion application and expose it to a client. If you're a consultant, you can say, oh well, here, I'll write this custom solution for you, and if you want to modify it, here's this graphical tool for doing tweaks here and there. So, next slide. I don't know if you guys actually remember micromenus. This code totally worked. So the idea was to use the HTTP based like proto web browser built into a lot of SIP phones, a lot of desk phones, and essentially you send them a URL over DHCP or in like a web configuration tool, and it press the button on the phone, does a request to the URL. Adhesion would be waiting for it, and it would execute this DSL. It would show an image. It would show a couple items called employee weather information or system uptime. System uptime wasn't a link. The two above it were. You click call an employee. It shows you a directory of all the employees from the database, and their names are clickable. You click their name, and it actually dials the extension on the phone. It's pretty useful if you're sitting there with a phone on your desk and you want to like quickly find someone and go straight to talking to them. The other example, the weather information example, shows the call method with a block. The block is still like one of my favorite things I've done with Adhesion. Whenever you click that link, it executes that as dial plan code. So whenever the call starts, it goes straight into there and executes it as if it were inside of dialplan.rb. You inline the logic inside your micromenus file. And this totally worked. And Polycom sent me like mini phones to like support me and test this, and it was great fun whenever I was just getting Adhesion started. FreeSwitch Sandbox. If we're going to start working on FreeSwitch stuff, I think offering FreeSwitch Sandbox would be awesome. Shouldn't be very difficult to get this going. And it would be also awesome to use maybe Tim Patton's call from here thing to not require the user to get like a SIP phone. They can either have it call their cell phone, where they call into like a public number and enter a PIN, or they can just like click a button to call straight in. Right now the sandbox is implemented in Erlang. It was kind of my project to learn Erlang. It's on GitHub, but it can be done in Event Machine. Like, I think Event Machine was like really nascent at the time. It wasn't something I could trust, and now it's completely mature. And the reason why I chose it was because I didn't want 2 threads per call, which would have been the case if I weren't using Event Machine. I would have had 1 thread for one socket, the other thread for the other, and then add a bridge the 2. With Event Machine, it's 0 threads. It's like 1 thread for the whole application. So, next slide. Pivotal Tracker may help. I was hesitant to even put the slide up because I work for Pivotal, and there's like it can be seen as a conflict of interest. I just outlined a ton of different projects. I think a way of like getting these projects to get to a point where they're actionable. Pivotal Tracker is actually a really good tool. Like, if I hated Pivotal, I would still be using Pivotal Tracker just because it's a pretty awesome tool. Next slide. And in conclusion, I'd like to end on a personal note. Adhearsion has been an awesome opportunity. I can't even, like, I'm still sort of getting my brain around sort of what the past 3-4 years has really been for me. I've been to over 15 states and 6 countries, and as soon as I stepped out, this is my travel in North America, and this is actually outdated. Like, there's definitely some things which aren't marked here. Also, went around Europe a lot, and as soon as I stepped out of the community, you guys sort of stepped up and took on a lot of leadership roles. You know, you guys are doing an awesome job. In a lot of ways, you're doing a better job than I was doing. And the opportunities that I had with Adhearsion, I think, apply even more to you guys, especially if the community is growing. The community is growing. There's enough pie. We're growing the pie, as it were. We're not splitting it. We're growing it. And I encourage you guys and look forward to helping you find whatever opportunities you're looking for. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. I guess we want to maybe do a little Q&A with you. If you want to have some questions
or questions from Ustream or IRC.
Yeah. I think you're right on with the killer app idea around testing. I know when I was in the enterprise, we spent 7 figures to.
Can you guys speak up to make sure we can hear? Then there's a marching band we're competing with. I hired them for the conference, but
they started early.
They started early, so
and 3 suites over.
Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah. So in the enterprise, we built we hired this company. We didn't want any risk. We didn't want the open source in there. Very conservative company. And we spent 7 figures on an IVR platform, and then it was all delivered. And then we started asking those questions. Well, how do we ensure that it works? How do we test this? Then we wrote another 6-figure check, I think, to a testing company, that had some type of a platform. And then we had the idea of how do you ensure that it's up? I mean, how do you ensure that you've got 500 ports and all of them are still responding and everything running fine? So I think even that ping test type of a thing around that is a great idea.
Certainly. Yeah, I mean, why can't those 6-figure checks be to us?
Yeah.
I'll take a %.
Yeah.
If you could just repeat what he just said.
Yeah, Chris was mostly just agreeing with my point about the testing stuff. He was mentioning that he worked for a company which wrote a 7-figure check to company A, telephony company A. They delivered something which needed telephony company B to build something on the order of a 6-figure check, and this problem exists and is solvable, and hopefully open source isn't a scary threat to them. I think they realize that the community can innovate and be a source of simplification and other new approaches to things, and especially the Ruby community, right? Enterprise is now, I think they're looking at Ruby and they're like, wow, this is interesting, but how are we going to bring this in? And I think Adhearsion may be a way of not only bringing Adhearsion in through testing, but also maybe Adhearsion in as like the meat of the application. They could test it with Adhearsion and then use those exact same tests to build out a complete equivalent of that. That is, once all the tests pass, you've reproduced the application you just replaced with Adhearsion. So.
And while I think that they would have been nervous with an open source like IVR platform, certainly the open source testing platform, because in their mind it was kind of throwaway or one time, that would have been more than fine.
Cool. Any more questions?
Just one for me. DSL, what's the TLA? 3-letter acronym. What does DSL stand for?
It's a Ruby acronym. Yeah. The question is, what does DSL stand for? It stands for Domain Specific Language. I remember the first time I saw that coming into the Ruby space, and especially
it's
to
also a
telephony people.
term.
Yeah, especially to telephony people, it's a little bit confusing. Domain-specific language, the DALL-RB is a DSL. It's sort of the Ruby approach to just removing everything but the domain, right? You'll notice how there's no class definition in DALL-RB. It's like purely like, this is your context, here's your code, you're gonna dial, okay, you're gonna play, okay, you're gonna take input, okay.
Right.
There's no like, buffered reader equals new buffered reader, input stream reader, system living.
One question I've always had, since you mentioned it, why did you use that model as opposed to going with the more mainstream, everything's an object Ruby approach? Why?
It isn't. All of that stuff is an object. In fact, my philosophy for DSLs is to build an object which a file is instance-eval into. That is, you take a bunch of code in a file, and then you basically change self to be an object, and that becomes the container for all of the code over here. So it's still object-oriented for sure.
Okay.
There's no class definition, but that's not really object-oriented programming. Like the class definition just like moved over here because it's superfluous.
Okay, cool.
And it makes it a lot more approachable for people that aren't programmers per se.
Because a lot of people don't know what a class is.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people, especially in telephony. So.
And a lot of
Trying to
coming
save
from
you.
Asterisk.
Well, none of us here.
So, question I have. Ruby's great, with event machine and fibers and things like this. What's your idea of somehow looking at Scala to start doing some things as well? Just as a
Scala for telephony. Scala seems like a great language. Java seems also like a great language. Java's making a lot of headway. If you were going to use Scala, you would probably be using a lot of the Java technologies for telephony. Scala has the reputation, and I think it's a little bit justified, of being excessively academic. It was developed in Switzerland by a university, by a bunch of PhDs. They're really smart people. They developed an awesome synthesis between object-oriented programming and functional programming. But pick up the book, read it. They introduced a lot of new concepts. They merged those paradigms and had to invent things. It's very innovative for sure. It's a great language, but you're going to be Scala turns away people because it's so abstract. I'd say it's abstract and new. There's not much knowledge you can reuse whenever you learn Scala. So that said, Scala's DSL capabilities are actually pretty impressive. Besides Ruby, Scala's DSLs are pretty hot, I have to say. In fact, methods, they kind of syntactically expand the concept of a method where anything can be an operator. Like if you have like operand A and operand B, the operator is just another method. And you can even override what the precedence is, whether it's a method on the left operand or the right operand. Like really awesome stuff like that. And you can end up with like things that look almost like an English sentence. In fact, some of the BDD frameworks for Scala employ those creative DSL techniques, and you look at some of those, it shows that Scala is really cool. You could probably write DALL-RB in Scala and still have it be pretty nice if you think of it. If you think of the APIs like a Rubyist would. I don't know about components and stuff like that. I think you're gonna start diving into like, okay, now I have to use like a mutable like hash set. I have to mix in traits, and you're gonna quickly find Java and Scala inside your application. That might turn a lot of people away. So it's a really cool language though.
Another thing, Wayne Walker was saying that he's looked at scaling adhesion. He's done up to 500 simultaneous calls, for example. But he could only do it on JRuby. The MRI would fall flat.
What system was he using? Does he say?
Asterisk.
Asterisk.
Well, I mean, sorry, what operating system?
Oh, that I don't know.
Linux.
Linux.
Linux,
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Do you know
which
much about that
flavor.
system?
Just a little bit.
Okay.
But I think asterisk is a limitation. I don't think adhesion has anything to do with the
I'd be interested in seeing
CentOS 5.
Okay, cool. I'd be interested in seeing multiple Asterisk servers talking to the same adhesion thing, right? You can centralize all your business logic into one adhesion process on one maybe dedicated machine. Have like 5 Asterisk machines all talking to it.
Threads was an issue. That's why I had to go to JRuby.
Yep, I can see that.
He was losing a lot of calls.
That's why Event Machine and Fibers would be awesome.
Well, we know Ruby MRI has a lot of thread problems.
MRI especially, yeah, it has green threads, yeah.
You mentioned implemented your own event machine, right? I mean, like,
right. Yep.
Like, how do you compare, like, the event handling mechanism in general, like Adhesion using the Ruby as opposed to, say, for example, when it's developing IDEA using Java? Java framework has its own event
right.
The one he's mentioning is like, for this question, like, Java is like I can get like really good, like, I can like get as many threads as possible. It's still really more scalable. So how do you compare those two?
Yeah, so the question is, how does Ruby and Ruby's threading system and event machine compare to Java and Java's threading system and Java's evented.io? I think Ruby, I think they're all cut from the same cloth. I think the Java approach, Java has a better threading approach, but you get that for free whenever you use JRuby. Right? You have in fact, I think the latest version of JRuby doesn't even have a global interpreter lock. So it really is like, it's like, there's not much you're losing by using JRuby. It even compiles to class files. Like, it's just, you have a little bit of overhead because you're doing dynamic method dispatch, right? It's like, but whatever. I mean, the bottleneck's not going to be Java. It's going to be the underlying engine. So, so with Ruby and Event Machine, I think that to use those technologies together without Java would just be a matter of personal preference. It would be someone not wanting to have Java running because maybe they don't like the memory usage of it, or maybe they're just afraid of Java, or whatever. There's, people have reasons not to use Java, especially Rubyists do. There's, Rubyists are still coming on board the Java train. A lot of them left it long ago.
I mean, a few more points there is, the MRI can only be bound to one processor versus with the JVM, you can be multi-processor for free, once again.
Yep.
So there's those types of benefits that come about.
Right.
So what I was going to get at, you're kind of reflecting on this, what if Adhesion just became JRuby only? What do people think of that? What do you think of that?
No.
Not that we do it, I'm just throwing it out there as a
we
discussion.
definitely talked about this. There's a little.
There's some history there.
The question is, for people who didn't hear that, is why not make Adhesion JRuby only? Jason and I talked about this a little bit a couple of years ago, and
Wayne wants a JRuby only.
What would you gain?
By making it JRuby only?
Yeah.
If you sell
everyone
RAM, you
used
could make a lot
JRuby,
of money.
What's that?
If you sell RAM, you could make some money.
No, but I mean, what breaking change would you make so that it wouldn't run on MRI?
You could use Java classes instead of using Ruby Standard Library or Gem for something. You would have like a good use of JRuby with Adhesion is XMPP. Like a couple of years, although now I see Adhesion has XMPP built in, which is awesome.
On Event Machine.
Yeah, with Event Machine, yeah, that's awesome. But whenever we did XMPP in the past, we just used Stomp, and used JRuby. Start up Adhesion, JRuby, require stomp.jar, literally require stomp.jar, and then access the stomp classes, establish a connection, you pass in.
Smack?
Yeah, sorry, Smack. Yeah. I was asking for confirmation. Yeah, Stomp is a message queue protocol.
Yeah.
Which we also use.
Smack is Jive Software's fairly buggy implementation of XMPP in Java.
But as far as XMPP libraries go, I mean, it's pretty good.
It's the most complete out there, but it's
XMPP for R is terrible. It's based on RexML, which is part of the Ruby standard library. It's super memory efficient, and there's XMPP for R simple, which is even worse. I think Engine Yard was working on some new XMPP library for Ruby. I don't know where it went, but for a while it was a big problem in Ruby. It was like, how do you do XMPP?
So there's a question on IRC. Ben Langfeld asks, could Adhesion aim to resign Asterisk and FreeSwitch to a kernel type role and become the voice application platform?
Yeah, I talked about that a little bit during this talk. There's just a couple things to do before that happens. One, you want to automate the configuration of the underlying telephony engine, right? Adhesion should be in charge of that provisioning. So that's where configuration generation comes in. With FreeSwitch, it's awesome because you don't even have to write to a file. You just tell FreeSwitch, reload, and it goes to Adhesion, gets the config file, sends it back, and you can maybe even do some of that dynamically with the inbound event socket in FreeSwitch.
Imagine you could send a reload command using event socket to pull in.
Yeah, or even add this SIP here.
Yeah.
And it's a SIP registration. You could probably do that over event socket these days.
And Asterisk can do something similar because the latest free PBX, one of the things they do is they actually dynamically generate the config and push it down into Asterisk. As far as I know, using AMI.
Huh. Oh.
What config are you talking
about?
SIP peers, I think dial plan.
Yeah,
the claim was they did all of the configuration over AMI.
AMI doesn't it? The new AMI for 1.6 and higher actually has provisions for writing your dial plan through AMI.
Yeah, configuration generation would be awesome if you didn't have to write to a file or invoke some web request, right? If it were purely over these sockets, it would be awesome. And it's all definitely within reach, and it's a good idea that I think many people have thought of for adhesion. It's just a matter of like putting feet on the ground and hands on the keyboards to do it. It's a good question. Troy?
Somebody at ClueCon asked what I thought was a strange question at the time, whether anybody's tried to port adhesion to another language. And I still think that's a strange question, but seeing your talk made me ask, maybe instead of going more towards narrowing the requirements, like whether it's JRuby or something else that makes it harder to adopt, we could actually ask ourselves, what would it take for somebody to truly not need to know Ruby? Like truly be programming, to Ben's question, so it's an application programming language, and you are an adhesion developer. Now obviously you're going to need to know something about the stack, but if you're really editing dialplan.rb and it is truly a DSL, then sure, you're not going to be able to do super deep stuff, but it'd be neat to be able to design your own language.
I did an experiment at this one time. I had dialplan.js Rhino using JRuby. Started JRuby in started adhesion with JRuby, and it would initialize Rhino, load in that file, and then proxy a couple of methods over, and it works. I mean, it seems like being able to plug in new dialplan things should be part of the component system anyway. And the component system should be able to figure out where to go for a dial plan. So if you're running in JRuby, for example, that component could say, okay, well, this is a call for this. Maybe the super manager objects, if they existed, could be easily exposed so that the Ruby classes look just like the say Java classes or Scala classes or JavaScript classes.
I think that has a lot of potential. So a lot more people can write components or call them plugins or whatever in the DSL than would need to be able to write Ruby.
Right. Yeah, there's I totally agree. Unfortunately, it seems like it might be a little bit idealistic, because if you have like JavaScript, for example, JavaScript's not a general purpose programming language. So
yeah, you're going to need some knowledge.
If you're going to be talking to Ruby or maybe even Java from JavaScript, there might be some problems with that. Some things will be really difficult to account for.
Yeah, the bar is going to be above zero, but I think the closer we can get it to, like, hey, somebody can read PHP, can they load a dialplan.rb, modify it, put it up on GitHub, like these are the instructions for how to put your component up, and voila, now it is reusable for anybody else who has adhesion anywhere.
Well, and to that point, I mean, that was what extensions.conf tried to be, wanted to be. And when you try to do anything that's remotely programmatic, you get a big rat's nest of curly braces and parentheses and dollar signs and square brackets. Yeah. So I mean, if we can do better than that, I think if you can write an extensions.conf, you should be able to write a dialplan.rb, or we should make it as close to that as possible.
So how many people are writing components, and how many people are reusing them in more than one project?
And that's you had a slide about this. I really would like to see that grow because we're all reinventing the wheel constantly.
I just registered us AHNHub.com.
That's awesome.
And there's a Heroku project I just started, ahnhub.heroku.com.
So
So
watch out
we'll be
talking
hacking
about ideas
together.
around this guy because all the domain names disappear.
Oh, you're the guy who's got my .org.
So what sort of things are people doing in these reusable components, if you can share any of them?
Least cost routing was the first obvious one.
The one that I put together was I hate that when I do that. It was one of the actual underlying asterisk pieces. Wasn't following me. It was something else. It was something fairly obvious. I was just surprised to find it wasn't already in an adhesion. I can't remember what it is right now. But so I just went and wrote it as a component, and I put it up on my little site and dropped a message off on the group about it.
And then the interface, is it pretty much that you're putting something in your main component thing that does the for dial plan?
Dial by name. That was it. It was dial by name wasn't implemented. The directory function for asterisk wasn't implemented. So I wrote one, and I just kind of read some of the source code for adhesion, saw roughly the style everyone else was writing in, and I just basically duplicated it. I just swapped a couple things around, so it was using a directory command. And now, so if anyone wants to be able to use dial by name, it's aliased as directory or dial by name. You can use either because that's what my customers all call it because they're all business guys. They want dial by name. They don't want a directory. So that's what it does. And you can just anytime you want, just grab it off Git.
And you're using the dial plan for whatever block to inject it in.
So all I do is
And how many people have more than 1 or 2 lines in their dial plan.rb?
What do you mean by more than 1 or 2 lines?
Putting all the code in
all of my dial plan RB stuff pretty much says just call a component and then I have a line.
You'll see what I did. My dial plan RBs are messes. So.
Well, I don't want to get rid of dial plan RB. I mean, I think when you start getting into advanced stuff, it does go into a component. But eventually, we're going to take these components and assemble them into context-based, or if not us, other people will and have used context-based logic.
I think dial plan RB is part of the problem that makes components difficult.
What is?
I think dial plan RB is part of the problem because it's hard to use to share components because everybody's doing something different.
It's also harder to test.
It's definitely harder to test. In fact, that's my suggestion for testing adhesion apps is to use components. Totally.
I'm thinking we need something at a higher level, some kind of generalized state machine. That, in other words, some uniformity. We all need the rest, right, of HTML for our dial plans. So I can just drop in another component, and if I'm following standard adhesion protocols, I know it'll work. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Dial plan.rb, it's awesome for getting started. I think
it's great for getting stuff done too.
It's
just so easy to do.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's almost like a sketch pad, where you can play around something and go straight into there, and you can some applications it works perfectly fine for it, right? And some people don't want to be they don't want to mess with components.
Well, it's like the IRB for assets.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
Maybe not directly interactive, but that's when I'm testing little blocks, I'm always dropping it in there.
If you're trying to turn stuff over to the customer's hands, we need something that nice little interface will generate, let's say, some standardized dial plan, right? But I compete against guys charging $10,000 for their phone system. I'll write it up in adhesion in 10 lines of code, and it's done, right? It takes a lot more than that for me to put an interface on it, but and then that's 300 lines in the extensions.config. 10 lines in here, I'm done. So that's part of the problem. It's too successful. It's too easy. But it doesn't give our customers, the phone users, doesn't give them autonomy over the system.
Yeah. I want to bring up another example of a component, which is something I suggested for CloudVox to do actually, which is in the code example I gave, where you do execute Swift, you could have CloudVox say or something, and then you wouldn't have to do any escaping. You could make it really nice, just present something.
Well, you don't have to do the escaping anymore.
Oh, cool.
In the latest adhesion, it's finally doing the proper argument escaping.
Awesome.
So that example up there doesn't need to. I was actually, as you were blowing through there, I was like, that GSOP doesn't need to be there anymore because
as we grown from 2 years of progress.
Yeah, I think it was in 084 that it finally got.
Yeah, it was.
You can specify a delimiter and it will be escaping the stuff inside of the arguments. So
that kind of dovetails to a question I had. What's the current licensing? Like, if we contribute something, I should probably know this anyway, but who gets it, and what happens with new stuff like AHN Hub or whatever?
That's a good question. Like, for a long time, it was like me and Jason, and then there would be people who would hop in, or they would be working on a contractual basis. So yeah, it's probably the time when we start talking about that. It's a great time to bring that up. Yeah.
Because I'd love to do like a voicemail component, but I'd want it to be a community resource and a community, or at least a reliable hub, or know what
I would think
Well,
components
right
can be
now,
licensed
so-
separately from components.
Okay, cool.
So I mean, which means it's very liberal license.
Yeah, you guys are both saying the same thing.
Okay.
LGPL allows for components to be licensed differently.
Yeah.
Wait, but that's for everybody but CloudVox. Anything CloudVox submits becomes property of Voxio.
There's no discussion.
Including everything up the stack.
Yeah, it's retroactive to 2002.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I mean that is a really good point.
together.
That it might make sense to consider the Apache license or MIT or one of those that really is pretty much.
I vote for MIT. I would be cool with that.
Yeah, that works.
They would encourage contributions. Like, I'd be much more inclined to go hack on a
Let's do it.
voicemail
I'm not tied
component.
to LGPL.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's decide that by the end of the conference.
Yeah.
Better to do it when we have still relatively few contributors rather than track them all down.
Yeah, so-
Almost everybody's in this room, so we can.
Yeah.
And that also is encouraging to do it. Like, you know, if I go write a voicemail component or a whatever component, and when it's teeny, it's 8 lines or whatever, and it starts LGPL, there'll never be a decision of, look, you know, I've got 30 hours invested, I can't LGPL this, where somebody can actually ask. If we start early enough, then stuff will grow while it's open source licensed.
Yeah. Any more questions before I wrap up?
Yeah, I thought that might be a good segue to so thanks, Jay.
Thanks, guys.
And obviously he's going to be around here, so if you have any other questions. So Jason Gecke, who heads up Voxeo Labs, it was his idea to kind of call this an unconference, and so I thought I'd let him take the floor and explain what that means, and basically figure out how we're going to do our breakup sessions and stuff like that for the rest of the couple of days in between the speakers that we have lined up. So Jason.
Thank you. How many people have been to an unconference before? So we've got a few people in here. So I'll cover it for the people that haven't been. So the idea of the unconference is, instead of having a formal set of speakers throughout, we actually decide together as a group some breakout sessions we want to do, and then actually break out and focus in different areas together. And we'll come up with a list of what those are and kind of vote on them and decide who wants to go where. And we are going to punctuate that with some formal talks, but specific talks, where we want to bring the group back together to have specific subjects like Cloudbox is going to talk, Michelle is going to talk, we want Ben to talk about the roadmap and things like that. And a couple of goals that I personally have for this is, one, I'd like us to establish what the roadmap is going to be for Adhearsion, through to 1.0, right? By the end of this conference, at least come up with some type of a consensus, both people online, which I'd like to figure out how we can get you participating.
There's a
as well
conference,
as
we can hear them if they want to talk.
Yeah, exactly. What we can also do is maybe set up a go-to meeting that people can come to if we're going through and doing some code, like pair programming and things like this, and let people join in that way and watch what's going on. And then the other thing is, decide any of the other community logistics, such as the licensing, such as how we want to handle contributions, using GitHub, things like this. And I personally would love to see us having the GitHub component site up and running as well, as a third goal, right? And he's already got the domain going, and I'm sure he's already got a Rails app up and running as well.
It's on Heroku now.
Yeah, and shouldn't we be, since it's in production use, should it be version 1.0 by now? According to Tom
that's a
Preston
good
Warner.
philosophical question.
Right, that's Tom Preston Warner's
I think it's more feature completeness that we're
versioning thing. If it's in production use, it's.
But we can have that discussion as well, right? So maybe I'll start off by creating a list of some of the breakout sessions that have kind of percolated up, both in your talk and what we've been talking about here. And then, we'll decide what those are, and then probably break for lunch and come back and get started. Sound good? So I'd already written some up over there, right? So as we talk about the breakouts, One is anhub.com, which will be the component sharing. And I should not be the one up here writing clearly. The other one I put up here is, Jay made the comment of actually using a SIP servlet platform like MobiSense or SIP Method or SailFin. Voxeo Labs, we've actually done an open source Java library, which sits on top there and abstracts some of that we've been talking about porting adhesion to. And we call that Moho. So Moho hacking session could be one.
And since we're now talking about FreeSwitch and Moho, I would like to spend some time on the abstraction that needs to happen. Supermanager, getting it to the point where writing an adhesion application is portable across all the backends.
Yep, so this kind of comes into Supermanager.
And then I'd like to talk about the opposite, which is being able to extract the AGI and AMI library to use that outside of the rest of adhesion.
You might want to talk about gem-based components, since it sounds like a lot of these are probably going to depend on that.
Yeah, this kind of goes into gem-based components.
That shouldn't be too difficult.
Especially with AHN Hub.
Exactly, which really all comes down to bundler, which is something I believe Ben's already started working on.
There's a branch it needs some. I had no experience with bundler when I started, so there's a lot that needs to be corrected.
Yeah.
I've probably done the most with that in adhesion so far.
Cool. Okay.
Awesome.
So we should spend some time on that.
Maybe on a less technical front, but more figuring out how to build a more cohesive online community for us as a group.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly what that entails, and there might be something that we already have in place that we're not using, or maybe that's a new thing. So we should probably be thinking about that.
I think we need a cohesive social media strategy for this.
Definitely.
Well, yeah.
I just know you're done.
We need a line.
So I have a couple ideas about that. One would be something like Stack Overflow. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It's a way of submitting questions. They get rated up.
People
actually get like points. Yeah, you get like points for like replying to something.
Can you unlock badges?
Yes, you literally can. You can unlock badges. Cool.
All right,
then it's sold.
They have those private sites now, but I don't know if we have.
Yes, they have it.
I don't know what you have a commitment level to get the site to stay open with them. I don't know if we.
With Stack Overflow, there's Sharpeauto. It's like an open.
Well, it's open source. We could host it ourselves if we wanted to.
Yeah.
Well,
there's an open source one.
Another thing to think of is that it may just be worth directing people to pay more attention to the adhesion tag on Stack Overflow. I mean, that there are people asking questions about this stuff.
Yeah, we don't need to
on the
overthink
site,
it.
and I
Maybe
don't
it's something
think
as
that,
simple as that, but you know, we should spend some cycles thinking about that.
You know,
And it'd be good to aggregate that stuff, right? We can maybe have like just a Solr server into which we dump a bunch of aggregated information, and then we present a way of searching.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether or not Stack Overflow provides the ability to get an RSS feed for a given tag, but if it was, just actually showing that on the front page of the adhesion site or something like that, here are the things that people have recently been asking, could just help to drive people in that direction without having to, get your own Stack Overflow clone and all that stuff.
I have Solr experience, so I can help out.
The other thing is where so many of us seem to congregate on the IRC channel. One thing that we had done when I was working for a sysadmin at a company is that we had actually programmed a stupid little bot job that every time one of our servers had a complaint, the server actually logged into the IRC channel, whined about whatever the problem was, and then left. It wouldn't be. Yeah, exactly. Maybe the answer is for Stack Overflow is. I don't have the chops to do it, but if there's somebody who's got the tech know-how, essentially just something that tumbles through, and every 15 minutes, who's posted anything that's new to a tag, and pop the question into the IRC channel, so that we're collectively as a group aware of that it's happening.
And taking that a step further, I like that idea. You could actually have a Google search trigger, which pushes anytime adhesion appears anywhere.
So
in a Google index to the IRC.
I have an IRC bot on GitHub that I actually use to do similar things for JRuby. And so if somebody wants to go and look at that,
I'd love to be able to look up tickets too. Like if you go into Astros Dev, they'll type in a ticket number and it'll just pull the summary and the status. That could be
so rather than solving this here, maybe this should be a session.
Yeah.
Thank
you, Adam.
One thing I'd say as the newcomer to adhesion, documentation
Yeah.
Oh, come on.
D word.
Shut up.
No.
There's plenty of it. We just hide it from you.
I believe it's called source code, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's something
Oh,
we
the
talked about
obvious.
using GitHub pages, and,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of really good content on adhesion.com, and most of it is even still correct, but it's definitely out of date. With some of the new developments like Blather.
Well, I would go as far to say that it could stand a reorganization.
That's
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
Can I
We hear you.
I think
say
we would all
something
vote with you.
blasphemous? Is that I would love to talk about a de-meta-programming effort.
Okay.
That
Okay.
What's the inverse of
Demystification.
Yeah, that I think that the dial plan RB is one example of it, but a lot of the initialization stuff, that because it's so un-Ruby, it makes it very difficult, even if you do know Ruby, to figure out where to look in the code base to find where certain things happen until you fully understand the code base. You know, now it's very easy that I know exactly what subdirectory to go to find whatever.
Yeah.
But because Ruby is so dynamic, that trying to find out where do I go to find out what the default options are for this initialization thing isn't straightforward, and solving that problem kind of alleviates, at least for me, some of the documentation stuff, because if I can at least see the structured stuff, and while it doesn't have a direct map, I love what Sinatra has done with having it be very Ruby but still approachable, and I feel like they've done a good job of reaching a good compromise between.
You mean the Sinatra DSL for writing like like git / whatever.
But that still, a lot of that is still contained in a class that you know what it's called, and a lot of these sorts of things, so that it is kind of straddling that line between we have our own DSL, but it still is exposing enough Ruby to fit.
That will definitely be an interesting conversation to have. I'm all for trying to make the code base easier to grok. One thing that comes to mind is like the adhesion logging system. That's definitely some meta programming going on there.
Yeah.
And it's kind of up to you guys whether that's useful. I kind of like the syntax of it, where you can like define these namespaces and they get like initialized once, and then it no longer goes to method missing. It goes to like the actual method once it's initialized, and then you can have all these different logging levels, and you can maybe pipe like the database logging, which I saw was added. You can maybe pipe that to like a different file.
Well, actually, that raises a good point, because I did the same thing with Blather, and Blather at debug is really noisy. I'd love to be able to, and I don't know exactly how this works, but to be able to set different log levels for different subsystems. Because maybe I don't want Blather and Active Record at debug.
That was the original intent of having namespace logging.
And Log4R does have a lot of support for that.
Yeah,
it's arcane, but it has it.
Well, I'd like to be able to see that even maybe put into the config generators, because that could be helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that dovetails into discussions about maybe integrating event machine fibers in and some of the theater stuff out potentially, as we talk about kind of peeling back some of the complexities, because event machine was considered when we first did the port to, what was it, 080 I think it was, right? Where you did theater around that.
082 or 3.
Yeah, but the idea was that event machine was only a C library at that point, and we wanted to ensure JRuby compatibility. Now that that's no longer an issue, we could actually do a lot with this that would simplify things in the code base as well, I think.
And for the AMI library in Adhesion, I actually implemented something called Event Socket, which simulates the event machine API, because it has a really awesome API, and because that's abstracted in Event Socket, it's really like a drop-in replacement. So that it's trivial to get AMI backed by event machine. In fact, the Raggle state machine parser of the AMI protocol was explicitly designed for event machine.
That is another question I have. How many people are using events?
Very much.
Like events.rb?
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually using them in components too, because you can define event handlers in a component.
Yep.
I use that a lot.
AMD methods for events
If I had more code examples, I may use them more, but I haven't needed them yet. So.
It's the kind of thing where once you realize what it can do, you start seeing a lot of uses for it.
Yeah, that's
what
what I
for
figured.
me.
Especially with the hang-up stuff.
Yeah.
I'll throw in, I've got a very Ruby startup on Gist of an asterisk AGI simulator.
Oh,
and I'm going to extend that this afternoon to support actually sending commands and getting responses in the lid.
You mean it mocks out asterisk altogether?
Sort of. It does enough of, like, it does all the AGI underscore fast AGI headers, and does the replacement for the URL and the context and stuff, but it doesn't get more than 2. Right now it gets 2 commands in, and you can set whatever those first 2 are. I'd like to be able to do, you know, send and then expect with just enough delay that you can pretend to have a phone call.
Cool.
So you don't need to do the "Can you hear me now?" You know.
It sounds like we are kind of having like a session right now. I'd really like to talk to you guys about the testing idea too. Probably don't want to go into it right now since that could take a long time. I'd like to talk about it in detail.
Maybe we should prioritize our 2 pages.
Because I think
Yeah.
we got a full weekend with this one.
Yes, I think this kind of is a good list to go through overall. I'd say maybe what we do is we go to lunch, people talk a little bit, think about the list we've got, and then we come back and prioritize after we kind of socialize the list of it. So,
I'll throw in.
and I'll post it up on the blog quickly as well for the people that are remote.
That's cool.
I'd add that passion goes a long way. Like if there's something that you see that you're willing to either work on or are
definitely.
interested in,
Yeah,
I totally agree.
Exactly.
Because
Or you see something you would want to use in your own consulting practice or whatever.
Exactly.
I did have one other thing to add to the breakouts.
No, it's done. That's it.
We were talking about releasing 085 this weekend to coincide with AdhearsionConf. I have several tickets marked as fixed committed, and we should. And you mentioned that you were having some problems. I think I know what that was, by the way.
Good.
But it wouldn't hurt if we could do some coordinated testing and just make sure that it really is ready to release.
Bring a production box we can put on.
One other session I'd like to see, I don't know if anyone else would, but I'd like to have us sit down with Jay and Ben here, and maybe you, and get into some. I just got some high-level questions about code, about the thought process of the code. Maybe a lot of people would like that.
Yeah.
I think it would answer a lot of people's questions.
Yeah.
Ruby startup questions.
So you're talking like best practices? For
No, I'm
coding
talking
with
about
Adhesion?
like, okay,
Adhesion patterns, okay.
what methods are, you know, what does Diaplan do the weird things that it does, right? What classes
Oh, I
are
see,
included?
kind of an internals.
And then where's the glue? Who wrote the AMI and the AGI code, or RAMI or whatever? Did Jay write all that, or did he pull it off the existing code? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'd like to get.
I wrote the AGI stuff.
So you did all. So yeah, I just want to.
Actually, it was
understand a lot of that stuff.
I think it was mostly me, and it was also Chad Fowler and Marcel Molina.
Okay, so you guys rewrote. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of just probably 45 minutes. Just could really tear into that. And,
yeah, that's a good
maybe,
session.
maybe write down our notes somewhere and blog it somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Good idea.
All right, perfect. So that's our list. We'll come back by 1, let's say.
Hey.
Yes.
And decide the first 2 breakouts and go from there.
Yeah, there's just so everyone's aware, right across the street there's a place to eat. There's an Indian place downstairs, right around the corner. There's a
server that's affiliated with
place
Point
called
Project.
Belden. That's good.
There's, right around the corner, there's actually a.
I'm going to.
We had lunch.
Let me just stop the recording real quick.
I can just point to it.
You can absolutely. Yeah. Would you have a server?
Because it's forcing me to pick one or
Over on Martin Street.
Do you? Oh, you just want to be able to dial
About
past the
6
URL.
places in the
I
block.
don't know. Try skip. There's a skip button. There you go.
Okay.